Ever since 2013, Lightroom began to support PNG files. For a project like this one, my calendar pages with blocks of type embedded and my intention for you to add to what already exists, I now generate files that are PNGs rather than JPEGs for use in these calendars. After you download my zip file, open each calendar PNG individually in Photoshop. Note that I'm doing this process in Photoshop because I work daily moving files back and forth between Lightroom and Photoshop, a variety of third-party plugins, even the wonderful, relatively new Affinity Photo application. You could certainly create a watermark effect within the print module as part of setting up your calendar pages there, but I prefer this process I'm showing you instead. If you have watched my screencast series about watermarking images for use on your promotional websites, a personal portfolio of original creative work, you will know that I am not a big fan of Lightroom's process. I just prefer to do watermarking principally by creating an ID stamp inside Photoshop, then placing that identifier where I see fit quickly and easily in a process I have another series of screencasts describing how and why I do things that way. See the information below this video for a link to those movies. But first, a bit of setup. I explained earlier, a PNG file is better to work with than a JPEG when you intend to make additional changes to a file. However, when editing a PNG, we are presented with a locked index layer, which is a real pain to effect. So I move up to the image menu, down to the mode option, and choose RGB color. That changes the index layer into a standard Photoshop background layer instead. I press Command-R on my Mac or Control-R on a PC to call up rulers along the top and left side. Next, it is possible to have your rulers set to read in inches, centimeters, or millimeters. We want to be working here in pixels instead. So right-click or on a Mac, Control-click on the ruler scale and choose Pixels. Next, with the Move tool active, click and drag a guide down to the 1600 pixels mark along the ruler on the left side of the Photoshop workspace here. That's approximately 1/3 of an inch or 7 millimeters from the bottom of the calendar. Remember to drag a guide down to the same spot on each of the 12 PNGs you are working with, provided you in your download. To help me decide upon the best font for my purpose of creating that subtle ID on my calendar pages, working on a Mac, I open the Font Book application. Looking through my system fonts, I can see that most are too decorative in my opinion. They would likely detract attention away from the clean design of the calendars, perhaps even the photos I intend to include above. So I eventually jumped down to my sans serif collection and end up choosing the font Gill Sans Light. After typing what I have in mind to use as my credit line, I press Command and the Return key on my Mac, Control and Enter on a PC to commit that type to its own layer. Then, with the layer still active, I hold down the Shift key and drag my text into place along to the right side of the calendar. I want to make a few additional tweaks to my new type, so I open the Character panel, find it in the Window menu, then selecting the portion of text.com, I move up to the Font Style options, click on the downward pointing arrow there and select Light Italic. Then press Command Return or Control Enter to commit that change. Next, in the tracking section of the character panel, I select the value 25 to add a bit of breathing room around each letter, and then I'd like to tighten up the overall width of this typeface, so I double-click on the horizontal scaling value of 100% and change it to 90%. This all looks better to my eye, but I prefer to have my authorship identification to be subtle as possible. I despise in-your-face watermarks. This identifier tag here in the corner of my promotional calendars is intended to be an inconspicuous reminder of whose work it is that sits upon clients or a colleague's desktop, a friend's countertop, perhaps motivating them to look at some additional examples of the work illustrating the calendar up top. To effect my completed identification mark, I first zoom out enough to simulate a CD case in size on my screen. Then I reopen the Layers panel and, floating my cursor over the opacity label, I use the scrubby sliders that appear there to decrease the opacity of that blue type, pulling left. That will reduce from 100% to whatever I intend. I can now use this text layer on each of the other PNG files that make up the 2018 calendar series. I go back to the set of files from within the series downloaded earlier and open up the next month, February. Once again, I choose to transform this PNG from its current color mode, index, to RGB color. It's important to set up a new guideline at the base of the file. So I drag one down from the top ruler and place that new guide at the 1600 pixel mark along the left vertical ruler scale, just as I had done earlier. I switch back to my first calendar page, January, which already has my new michaelmarish.com identifier in place. I make sure that the Move tool is active, easily done by pressing the V key on my keyboard, and then with that text layer selected, note that it is my habit to color code layers in blue when they somehow affect an important layer down below, in this case my background layer. Float my mouse cursor over the text I want to move, click, and drag up to the title line with each of my open files lined up as tabs there. And when my cursor and the text I hover over the February file's titled tab, that file becomes active, and I continue to drag down with my still depressed mouse cursor to the bottom of the calendar page. I release my mouse and allow the copied text layer to land atop my February calendar layout. Because the Move tool is still active, one is able to use the arrow keys on the keyboard to move the text layer into a precise position, or simply click and drag it into place. Because I had earlier set the guideline as a helper, the text will pretty much snap into place, at least vertically, 1600 pixels from the top of the calendar, 29 pixels from the bottom, approximately 1/3 of an inch, or again 7 millimeters from the bottom of the calendar if you are working outside of the United States and you use millimeters instead of inches. Now when it comes time to export my just edited calendar pages, I go about that process the old school way. I utilize the fortunately still included command Save for Web and Devices. I drop down from the File menu. Then, at the Export option, I choose what is labeled as Save for Web Legacy in Photoshop CC 2017. It is instead labeled as Save for Web and Devices in older versions of Photoshop. And this dialog window opens. Note that I have the window set to show 2 up, my original, and to its right, whatever file format I want to consider and compare to my original beside it. In this case, I will choose PNG 8 as my optimized file format, and maintain the optimal 256 colors used to render the file. Also, take note below at the image size we are saving the new PNG. 1404 pixels wide by 1629 pixels tall. This is the same size as the original PNG files provided in the download of my zip file for this CD Jewel Case Calendars project. See? Now, when you click Save, the host folder of the calendar page you have been working on, the calendar folder, when you open up my zip file, will open. A cautionary dialog will open telling you that by using the same name as I had originally titled the PNG file, you will be replacing that original. Do not worry. Press Replace, and Photoshop will overwrite the original I had included for your use on this project. It is better, I think, to overwrite and have but one file per month within this Project Assets folder than to have similarly named doubles there. Better to avoid any confusion later as you import the 12 PNG files for use in your calendar project into Lightroom. Move on and through the remainder of my 12 PNG files provided, adding your identification text in the bottom right of each month. Save, and when all are completed, you're ready to build your CD jewel case calendar with that subtle reminder in place on each page, potentially motivating those looking at your work in that calendar to pay a visit to your site, look at additional examples there, maybe even inspire them to give you a call because of what they are experiencing.